next speaker for the advanced medical student is Santiago Angaramo. I apologize for botching that. Please forgive me. But we're excited to have you come and speak, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Santiago Angaramo is pretty spot on. I'd say it wasn't too far off.
Thank you.
Actually, let me see if I can share this in another way. There you go. The technical difficulties here, but I think I got it figured out. All right, and you can see the full screen there.
Now it's perfect. Excellent. Thank you.
So, like Dr. Bowman said, I'm Santiago. I am a fourth year at Vanderbilt. I am currently applying for ophthalmology residency. We're fresh off the mint fourth year. So Hannah I guess she'd be joining us because she took that gap year, but she's a year ahead of me and I'm in the same class as her husband. Obviously, been at Vanderbilt for 4 years now. Before that, I was at the University of Miami where I did a degree in chemistry. I would say I'm a pretty traditional student. Didn't take any gap years or anything like that. I've been straight through the whole way. The only maybe tiny gap I had was I graduated a semester early in Miami in December and spent that extra semester just working in my research lab. Same thing I was always doing, but then they were paying me money. So it worked out well. So I'm just going to go over kind of my personal history here and then a quick professional story. So like I said, born in Argentina, all the things that you think of, Leo Messi, steak, wine, all those good things. I come from two fantastic parents. My dad, like we were mentioning before, I do have a physician in family. My dad's a cardiothoracic surgeon and now an anesthesiologist. And my mom is a pharmacist, but they are the first generation of my family to actually get a higher education. So they decided that it would be worth making the move to the States to give me, my brother, and my sister a better opportunity. She might be upset because I couldn't find a good, cute little picture of her, so it's just me and my brother. Both of them weren't interested in STEM at all. Both of them do business. One's an accountant and one's I guess they're both accountants now, but I'm the only one that decided to pursue medicine at the end of the day, and hopefully I'll give you guys a good reason for why. So in high school, I did a bunch of different things, but I'd say the most impactful things is, I don't know if I actually mentioned, I'm from Worcester, Massachusetts. Was raised there most of my life, only briefly went to Ohio, and then we went back to Worcester. So if you know anything about Worcester, one of the big hospitals they have there is the University of Massachusetts. So I spent a lot of time there, a lot of summers there during high school doing volunteer work, volunteering in the emergency department, in the pharmacy department, and the endoscopy suite, just all over the place. I shadowed a couple of local primary care doctors during that time too. I mean, it was all just observing, as most of those things are, but they were good experiences just to kind of get my feet wet and understand where I wanted to go. I think obviously from that spread of volunteering, it's pretty obvious that I was interested in something related to math and science. I think for me, it was always that way. I don't think to go into medicine or it has to be like that. But for me personally, those were the classes I was always the best at. I always hated English class and always wanted that to be over as quick as possible. So math and science were definitely the strong suits. So it just kind of came down to the things that were obvious to me. My dad's a doctor, maybe think about medicine. My mom's a pharmacist, maybe think about pharmacy. I've always liked teaching. And then when I started to get more and more research experience, like I did at Assumption College when I was a lab assistant, I thought, well, this is definitely something I'm also interested in. So by the time I got to university, which was at Miami, I was kind of split between three different things. I was thinking medicine, just pursuing research, or maybe just going to pharmacy school as well. I think at that time I was kind of going through transition of what kind of student I was. For a long time, I was kind of just a very average B student, almost like straight B student for most of that time. And I think near the end of my high school, I decided that I think I could do better, I could shoot higher. So I kind of started to push myself like that. And so when I came to Miami, it was kind of a new challenge for me. It was kind of a opportunity to maybe prove to myself that higher education was going to be an option. So I really try to push myself, try to get involved in a bunch of different things. You know, I think I was kind of going in blindly, didn't have much mentors then. So I just kind of did what everyone does, the typical, like we mentioned, checking the boxes, like getting involved in the research and stuff like that. And then through that, I think I started to understand what was more important to me and what was less important to me. And I kind of started focusing into these, like I mentioned here, these 3 different groups right here. So one of the biggest things I did was inorganic chemistry research. I joined it in my end of my first year, I think, of university. And it was just a really great experience because I got a fantastic mentor who kind of helped me through the whole process. Of course, he wasn't an MD and didn't understand why I wanted to apply to med school in the end, because I think he really wanted me to keep going down the PhD route. But I think having strong mentors that are willing to just kind of guide you through the whole process is invaluable. And then on top of that, I also found that I kind of really like teaching and mentoring. So I started getting slowly more involved into things like pre-med mentorship. I did that my last 2 years. I think I tutored for 3 out of the 4 years. And near the end, I was a biochemistry TA. So that was just one of those 2 things. I'm like, I really like doing research. I really like teaching. And then this last bit of service is when I kind of got to do a lot more of that with my primary care over the summer. He was one of our local primary cares that my family had used to go to when I was much younger. And it was just a really great experience to me to work with an underserved population. He has mostly Hispanic patients. And I feel like that really stuck with me. The teaching stuck with me and the research stuck with me. And with all those things together, I thought, what are the few specialties, or not specialties, or one of the few professions that can kind of offer all those things to me? And that was medicine. And I think the variety that medicine offered was really attractive to me, especially being in undergrad, a little indecisive, not knowing where to go. Medicine just has so many options as far as you can be in academics, you can do teaching, kind of like Hannah was mentioning, you can be a researcher, or you can just be the classic doctor that everyone thinks about who just does clinic work, surgery work, you know, the stuff that we usually think of. So I think just having those options was much more appealing to me in the end. And I decided that medicine was going to be the way to go. But it wasn't as straight, you know, now in hindsight, it's straightforward, but there was moments where I think it was on the fence. I think I came back during my sophomore year for winter break. And I had told my parents, like, I'm going to do pharmacy school. I think I'm going to be a pharmacist. So, and I'm sure they remember that. And it was a lot of flipping and flopping back and forth. But I think with the help of my mentors, particularly, especially the primary care I shadowed, it kind of helped narrow it down for me. So, like I said, medical school, I think these 3 things kind of have stuck with me when I figured it out during undergrad and now into medical school. I love learning. I'm definitely very curious. Med school itself is just nonstop learning. And then the research obviously kind of feeds into that as well. I'm big on service, particularly I'm helping out minority populations. Even when it comes to teaching and mentorship, I usually try to be a part of all those programs where if I can have minority, because I'm part of all these minority mentoring programs. So if I can have a mentee who's also minority and help them get into med school, that's something I usually like to focus on. So then things like Shade Tree Clinic, I think maybe Hannah had mentioned it, is our free clinic. I'm usually a Spanish interpreter there. LMSA is the Latino Medical School Association. Right now I'm the treasurer for them. When I started, I think I was the secretary. And then most recently kind of started this project called Project Fine, kind of a brand new club me and 2 other students made about a year ago now. We're both on the diabetes ISC and just realized that medical students do not know a lot about nutrition. So we were hoping to kind of bridge that gap, get some dietitians to come and talk to medical students, start some programs like teaching kitchens and things like that to get them more involved. And right now I'm kind of heading a subsection of Project Vine where we go to Dismas House, which is a place for recently incarcerated individuals to get rehabilitated. And we basically just provide nutrition lectures and teaching kitchens. And the last thing, it's the same that I did in undergrad, pre-med mentor. Now I do a little more teaching because I guess the more learning I've done, the more ability I am able to teach. So whenever we get physical diagnosis courses, I usually like to teach the first year students the eye exam because I'm applying to ophthalmology, and that's kind of another weak spot for med students is nutrition and the eyes. We don't know a lot about. So then maybe talking a little bit more about Vanderbilt itself. Like Hannah had mentioned, it's a very fast-paced first year. I think the program maybe is more forgiving to the traditional student, just because there isn't as many commitments if you're a traditional student. If you're someone who has a family and stuff like that, maybe that first year can be more challenging. That's just kind of a personal opinion of mine. But I think that first year really gives you a lot of flexibility and hindsight, because you get all this really nice early exposure to all these different specialties, so that by the time your third year rolls by, you're already kind of locked into a specialty, doing research, doing all the kinds of connecting and all the things you need to do to get into some type of competitive specialty, if that's what you're interested in. So if I had to do it all over again, I would definitely focus on this 1+3 program. It's not the traditional. The traditional curriculum is 2 years of book learning and then 2 years of clinic. This is just 1 year of the book learning, and then 3 years. By the second year, we're already doing our core rotations. It wasn't something I was considering when I applied to med school. I think I just kind of applied pretty broadly. I think Vanderbilt was on the list because, I think my dad went there for a conference one time and told me he really liked Vanderbilt. So I applied there for my undergrad, and I was like, okay, we'll apply there for med school too. And I got into the interview and everything, and I'm from Massachusetts. I went to Miami for college, all very blue and liberal states. So then when I was thinking I have to go to Tennessee, it's going to be interesting. I don't know. I definitely had my, notions about what it was going to be like, but it was nothing like what I thought. Obviously, Nashville is definitely a blue dot in a red sea. I had a lot of fun, made a lot of friends, and don't regret going to Vanderbilt, that's for sure. So then the only other thing I would say is that when you come into medical school, it's a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a change of pace. I think even if you're an excellent student and have been an excellent student for the longest time, you're going to be challenged no matter what. Like Hannah was saying, I think everyone feels a little bit of imposter syndrome. It's just the way, the nature of the beast, I think. So I think the way to survive is, have your community, have your friends. Everyone's going through the same thing. So we all know what it feels like when you feel like you're falling behind. I think being flexible with the way you study. I think in college I had a very, I'm going to write down every single note kind of thing after a lecture, and it worked so well for me that I kept doing that. But in medical school, there just wasn't a ton of time for that. So I started thinking about flashcard, things like Anki. Maybe you guys haven't heard of it. If you go to med school, you will hear about it. And that kind of just revolutionized the way I learned. So I think being open to changing your style is definitely important. And then at the end of the day, just understanding that if you are falling behind, that there's tons of mentors and teachers that are here to help. So ultimately, it's been extremely rewarding. Kind of sad that it has to end, but I'm excited that ophthalmology residency is on the horizon, because that should be a lot of fun as well. So I think that'll be the last bit of the personal before I transition more to the professional side of stuff. I kind of wanted to talk about research again. I feel like I've got a nice spread of research throughout my short career so far. I did that bench research in the University of Miami, right, with inorganic chemistry. I came here, I did a little more clinical research, a little more quality improvement wise research. And what I ultimately latched on really early on to was a project in my second year with Dr. Padavani, who's a pediatric ophthalmologist here at Vanderbilt. And it was mostly a chart review kind of project where we were working to figure out, to see if there's certain connections with the genes of individuals in the development of diabetic retinopathy, so diabetic eye disease. And at that point, I was kind of like what most people do. You try to find a project, try to get on something early and find someone. Over time, I started, we were talking about it, noticing these trends in data. So I decided, here's a question. Vanderbilt does a really good job to push you to come up with a question and give you this research time. So I was just interested to see, how is hypertension related to diabetic macular edema? I noticed a trend in the research. I thought it was something I'd be interested in pursuing. So I did. And maybe before we go too far into it, diabetic retinopathy, super briefly, you got diabetes, damages the vessels in the eye. The retina becomes ischemic. Sometimes you have little bleeds, all those kinds of things. Bunch of fancy terms for it, like Continental spots and hard exudates. But ultimately, there's a lot of vision loss. And one of the ways that people drastically lose vision is either having a bleed in the eye or having a lot of fluid build up in the back of the retina. So this is a cross section of the retina. This is the retina itself. This is like the blood vessels of the retina down here. And this is what it should look like normally, this nice little dip and curve. Right here's your fovea. This is like the 20/20, the clearest vision, the crispest vision. And then people with diabetes, they sometimes get these giant pockets of fluid, which are all these little bubbles. It really distorts the pattern of the retina. And you know, if it's supposed to look like this and it looks like this, these people are not looking very well. So what I was interested in is just kind of the pathophysiology of that. Is hypertension related to that? And if it is so, how much? Is it something that we should be considering more closely? So the data on that was a little more controversial. There wasn't a ton. It was part of the literature review that I did. Found out that, you know, maybe systolic blood pressure was related, maybe not so much diastolic, but it was just not very clear. So I kind of decided to design a couple of different projects. This is just a sample, one of them, where I looked at the average blood pressures a year after the diagnosis of retinopathy and said, put them in these categories, these pre-made categories, and said, was that affecting the risk of them developing this fluid in the eye that we're talking about, diabetic macular edema? I think the biggest process of this was just coming up with the question, doing the literature research for the question. I feel like those are the very standard ways about it. So far, everything is going well, figuring out the window I wanted to look at. And then by the time I got all the way there, that's when I started having more issues and it wasn't as linear as I would have hoped. I had to start learning a little more about how to process all the data, getting really good with Excel, a lot of self-learning, a lot of video watching by myself, kind of deciding what's the best covariates to look at, whether averages of blood pressure or maybe a time-dependent analysis was better. Through a lot of biostat clinics and with my mentor, we kind of figured out a good way of approaching the fraud project. We're still working on it, but definitely a lot of good things came out of it as far as my own teaching. I just got to go from the beginning of the research project all the way to the end, and it was just a super helpful experience. Here's like a visual abstract of what kind of the end results looked like. At least for that one window here, it wasn't significant, I don't think. Yeah, for the 3 different ones, you can tell the P's are a little too high. The 2 years before, it was significant. So I feel like we're finding definitely little bits and different bits of information, which are new to us. But I think the biggest takeaway for me was that I could just take a project from the beginning to the end, kind of get through all these obstacles, because there was plenty of obstacles on the way in. And the people who helped out the most, my mentors and everything, just really pushed me through to get to the end. And I think that kind of brings me to my final point, which is the take-home points here was, I think the biggest point is just that mentorship is key. I think if you can be a mentor to other mentees, that's great. I think if that's kind of your thing and you like to teach, that's awesome. But you need to find yourself some really good mentors, because it'll help you get through all these challenges in life. I feel like in undergrad, I didn't have too many mentors, just my research one, and he helped me so much. Medical school, I realized how important it was. I really reached out to a bunch of different people, got involved early, which is super important, whatever stage of life you're in, to get involved as early as you can. And then you kind of develop those relationships, and those people will really just carry you to the end for sure. And then the last thing I'd say is it's definitely not to sweat the details. I can remember first year being really worried about falling behind, not understanding a thing about anatomy. And I just don't think it does you any service. I think that if you stay true to yourself and you work hard, it's going to be fine in the end for sure. And it's definitely comes down to following those passions that you had in the beginning. I think that may be it.
Wow, that is wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all that. It's interesting to me that kind of you talked about your journey and not knowing that you wanted to do medicine, and like it's like you had a logical argument in your head going on through college before you were able to kind of confirm and validate that that's what you wanted to do, even though you did have family who had done that. So that's awesome.
I think I've had, my older brother was always pre-dental for the longest time, right up until he got to college and made a big switch. So I think it wasn't foreign to me to make the switch, that's for sure. And I just didn't want to go down the pathway of medicine. I mean, the only thing I knew was my dad, who works at an academic center, When I was very young, he was a CT surgeon. And if anyone knows anything about CT surgeons, they work really hard. Then he turned into anesthesia. Maybe he wasn't working as hard, but it still seemed like he was really working hard. And he loved what he did, but I just wasn't sure if I would love what he did. And then I kind of got opened up through my mentors and realized that medicine is so much more than the clinical practice at an academic center. And there's really a wide variety of things that you can do within medicine. And I think that made me much more willing to give it the chance. And then once I got into med school, I think it was really good confirmation for me, because I don't think you never know for sure. But once I got in, I was like, yeah, that was a good decision.
Very cool. Thank you so much. We've got some time for questions if anybody wants to ask about his journey or path, applications, anything. I see one in the chat, so I'll open with this. You said in high school you weren't the strongest student, but in college you decided to step it up. What did you change to become more competitive? How did you increase your academic rigor?
So I think obviously I'm really fortunate. I got fantastic parents, a lot of great resources when I was growing up. I just think I wasn't using them at all, really. I think part of it was just kind of complacency of being a B student was satisfactory for my parents. It was satisfactory for me. And then I think part of the growing up process in high school, I kind of realized it's not for my parents anymore. This is for me. And I know that I can do better. So at the end of the day, I think it really just came down to mindset and pushing myself that little extra bit. And it was slow. I think junior, senior year, I started turning the process of being a little more competitive student. And then by the time I was in college, I just said, like, this is the standard that we're holding. And we're definitely going to try our hardest to stay there. And so then kind of once I knew what the limit of what I could do was, then I wasn't letting myself dip below that.
You're right. It's your life, right? And I think that's hard to sometimes feel.
We're too young in high school to realize that. So I think those first couple of years, you're like, you're just going to school.
Yep.
Don't realize how important it could be.
Great question. I have a question. It sounds like you were interested in research, but you were doing, to me, something that feels so far from medicine. You were doing inorganic chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever try something like biomedical research? And did you have any thoughts about doing that? Because it feels a little closer to helping people.
Yeah, I think, well, I did the inorganic in college just because I thought coming in, maybe I was going to be a researcher, and I really liked chemistry. So why not research something I really like? And it kind of worked out that way. And I just stayed in that lab for all those four years. And it was a good experience and got a lot of stuff done. But by the time that I went to medical school, I kind of branched out. I decided, well, bench research is kind of like, again, it's one part of research, but there's a lot of other things. Started doing a little more clinical research, more quality improvement things. And I definitely think that the clinical research is more appealing to me than the bench research. I think it took me a while to realize that, but like you said, it's just closer to the bedside rather than the bench. And now that I've realized that I kind of like service and the bedside, I've had all these opportunities that I've definitely leaned more that way. But it was kind of just trial and error, just tasting out all the different things, and ended up being kind of a process of elimination.
Very cool. There's a question in the chat here. For someone who's interested in the traditional path to medical school, any specific advice about that? And maybe this is a wonderful follow-up question. The traditional path might lead to burnout because you're pushing through to make it, and then you got to push through in med school. All of it is challenging. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's tough. Some of it's hindsight, I mean, one, it depends. It's so different from university to university to major to major. I had all my friends that were biomedical engineers when I was in college. I was just doing my chemistry major, and it seemed like they were suffering from burnout at a much higher rate than I was. So things like that, that's just hindsight, I guess, and it was fortunate that that wasn't my situation just because the workload seemed heavier overall. I think another practical thing is it might be if you're really early on in undergrad, the MCAT is obviously a big hurdle to get over. I think that if you can dedicate like a giant bulk of time just for the MCAT, it'll serve you well. So I took mine my sophomore summer, pretty much studied the whole summer for it, and it served me well. And I think I just did that because I knew taking the MCAT during my junior year while doing classes was just not going to work for me. So I kind of pushed early to try and sort that out. So I don't know if there's an exact solution to it. I think hindsight definitely showed me that there was things that saved me from burnout, but obviously having a life outside of medicine is important. So I think those are decisions you're going to make at the end of the day too. And that's probably why I won't become a CT surgeon like my dad.
Wow, that's a really good point. I think a lot of people follow the path of take your MCAT at the end of your junior year, but kind of being intentional about it. That makes a lot of sense. Great question here. Do you have advice for maintaining mentoring relationships? You talked about having mentors to help you kind of guide through things. But what about not wanting to like bother them afterwards? And, they're busy people.
Yeah, they can be. I think research in undergrad is a perfect way to get a mentor just because you're helping out the lab. They want you to be there. Maybe that's why I did, or maybe, again, hindsight, inorganic chemistry worked out so well because it doesn't really matter what type of research you do in undergrad to get into med school. They just want to see commitment to a project. And working at the bench side in the chem lab, there was just so much more opportunity to get in there almost every day if I wanted to and spend time with my mentor and really be more hands-on versus the experiences that I've heard otherwise for people who are doing biology related or clinical stuff, maybe it was not as hands-on. So regardless, research is one great way to just get a mentor and stay locked in with them. I would say be picky. There's a lot of teachers, a lot of mentors. I think I interviewed at like 3 labs before I decided sticking to the one I did in undergrad, and I'm super grateful I did. It was just those first couple of interviews with those people, it felt like they were not going to teach me. They wanted me to be the hands around and helping around all day, but they weren't going to help teach me. So I think if someone rubs you the wrong way, it's okay to go to the next person because not everyone's a great mentor. I think like Hannah was mentioning, there's some skills involved in teaching that you need to figure out. So I'd say be picky with your mentors. And if it's a clinical mentor that we're talking about outside of research, go in a clinic like once a month for like 4 years in a row is a lot. Once a week for a year is a lot as well. So I think if you can kind of space out your interactions and just be that face that they're seeing every day, I think that's fine. They're not expecting a lot from undergrad mentors, and stuff, or undergrad shadows and stuff like that. So I think just showing faces is more than enough.
I think that's a really good point. I think one thing I've learned kind of to jump on, I hope this is okay. It's okay also to have mentors for a phase. I think sometimes, we talk about the importance of mentors and help with guidance and everything. And I think I have often wondered, should I stay in touch? Do I need to, go back to that person regularly? And I think it's nice if you want to give updates about your life. Like, yeah, that's nice to do. But it's also okay for if you've used I don't know how else to say that. Use them as the mentor during the phase that you need their advice, and then you move on and you get a mentor for the next phase, or hopefully a network of mentors for the next phase. That's natural, I think, and that's what your mentors are there in that part of your life because that's where they can help you, and they may not be able to help you in the next phase.
Yeah, you're not their only mentee. They've had, if they're a good mentor, they've had several mentees before you. So I think that's fine that, sometimes it's only a phase in your life that you have a mentor. And it's also not limit one per customer. You can have several mentors. So I think just feeling out who you work and gel with the best is definitely important.
Excellent. I see one last question here, and then we'll call it a day. Any trouble with obtaining clinical experience early on?
Yeah, I think that's I was lucky I was next to UMass, and there's a lot of opportunities just to apply as a volunteer. I feel like those opportunities are dwindling recently. I don't see as many volunteer undergrads. And because of COVID, obviously, a lot of those things were dropped away as well. So I got the best experience in undergrad by shadowing my primary care. He was like a family primary care. We have known him for a while. So I think I was given, a good opportunity. He had a lot of hands-on experience for my level of training, but it is challenging. And again, I think that's that point in your life where you're probably not as plugged into a network as much because you're younger. And maybe if you have the resources, depend on your parents because your parents can help too. I mean, they know people, they have family friends who maybe someone's a doctor or knows a doctor who teaches students. So if I was an undergrad, I think that would probably be one of the better ways of reaching out.
And I think kind of to piggyback on that, if you don't have a network, I think sometimes, cold emails, it might take a lot, but emailing, even, I don't know, I'm an administrator, I'm not a physician, but I know the people at Vanderbilt sometimes to help connect people too. So I'm not a big fan of mass emails to just put out a big plea, but I think researching an institution to see who might be involved and not being afraid to ping several people if you're not successful to try to make it happen. There's always someone or a few people at an institution who are the helpful people who, if you're persistent, who will, and polite and kind and friendly and appreciative and all of the above, who will help you. So persistence is key.
And everyone's got their foot in the door here by being part of this program, getting to know people like me and Hannah. We're definitely willing to help out, and all the people in part of this program. So that's definitely a resource. And cold calling you wouldn't be the first person to do it. So
that's right. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everybody for watching.
Check out our website to find recordings of all of our videos. We'll get them posted about a week after each of the presentations. We can't wait to see you.